Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy, yet on Thanksgiving evening, he sat alone in the corner booth of an all-night diner, staring at a plate of turkey that might as well have been cardboard. Outside, snow fell softly on the Chicago streets, transforming the city into a postcard scene that families would photograph and treasure. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song while Marcus cut his meat into precise squares, a habit born from decades of business dinners, where every movement was calculated, every gesture controlled. He was 62 years old, worth $4.7 billion, and he had no one to call. Not on Thanksgiving. Not on any day. The booth across from him remained empty, as it had for the past 11 years, ever since the accident that took his wife and daughter on a rain-slicked highway during their drive to his mother-in-law's house. He had stayed late at the office that day, choosing a merger over a meal, choosing ambition over love. That choice had cost him everything that mattered, and no amount of wealth had been able to purchase forgiveness, especially not from himself. If you believe in second chances, in the power of kindness to transform lives, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of redemption and love to the world. The diner was nearly deserted, occupied only by Marcus, a tired waitress named Betty who had served him for years without ever asking why a billionaire spent his holidays in a place like this, and an elderly man nursing coffee in the far corner. Marcus preferred it this way, the anonymity, the absence of judgment. Here, no one knew about the Wellington Foundation or the 50-story building downtown that bore his name. Here, he was just another soul trying to make it through a holiday that felt more like an endurance test than a celebration. He had tried everything to fill the void. Therapy sessions that cost $500 an hour. Charitable donations that made headlines but didn't warm his heart. Dating women who saw dollar signs instead of the broken man behind them. He had even tried spending Thanksgiving with distant relatives, but their forced smiles and uncomfortable small talk only amplified his loneliness. So he came here to this unremarkable diner with its cracked vinyl seats and faded photographs of the Chicago skyline, because at least here, his solitude felt honest. The bell above the door chimed, and a gust of cold air swept through the diner. Marcus glanced up reflexively, then looked back down at his plate, but something made him look again. A family had entered, a woman in her early 30s, wearing a coat that had seen better winters, a man about the same age with a backpack that appeared to contain everything they owned, and 3 children ranging from perhaps 4 to 10 years old. Their faces were wind-burned and red from the cold, their clothes layered but insufficient for a Chicago winter. The smallest child, a girl with tangled blonde hair, clutched a stuffed rabbit that had been mended so many times it was more stitches than original fabric. They stood in the doorway, snow melting off their shoulders, looking around with an expression Marcus recognized all too well. It was the look of people who had lost their way and were trying desperately to find solid ground again. Betty approached them with a practiced smile, but Marcus could see her subtle glance toward the manager's office. This diner didn't turn people away, but he sensed the family couldn't afford even the cheapest item on the menu. The mother spoke quietly to Betty, gesturing toward her children, and even from across the room, Marcus could hear the tremor in her voice, that specific frequency of fear and shame that came from having to ask for help. Betty nodded, disappeared into the kitchen, and returned with 3 cups of hot chocolate for the children. The parents declined anything for themselves, their backs straight with a pride that poverty hadn't yet managed to break. The family moved to slide into a booth, but all the larger ones were occupied by dishes still waiting to be cleared. The only space available was the booth section near Marcus, where several tables could accommodate them, but those tables hadn't been set. The father noticed Marcus's table, saw the empty seats around him, and Marcus watched as the man's jaw tightened, clearly weighing his options. Then the man did something that would change both their lives forever. He walked over to Marcus's booth, holding his youngest daughter's hand, and spoke with a dignity that wealth could never purchase. He said his name was David, that his family had lost their apartment when the company he worked for went bankrupt, that they had been staying in shelters, but tonight all the shelters were full because everyone wanted to be off the streets on Thanksgiving, and that his children were cold and hungry and scared. He didn't ask for money. He didn't plead or grovel. He simply asked if his family could share the space near Marcus's table, just to sit somewhere warm for a while, just to let his children drink their hot chocolate without feeling like they were trespassing. He asked if that would be all right, and there was something in his eyes that pierced straight through the armor. Marcus had spent 11 years constructing around his heart. Marcus looked at this man, this father who had lost everything but was still trying to provide warmth and safety for his family, and he saw himself. Not the billionaire self. Not the successful businessman who made decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. He saw the man he might have been if that rainy night had gone differently, if he had chosen family over fortune, if he had been given the chance to hold his daughter one more time and tell her that nothing in the world mattered more than she did. Something cracked inside him, some frozen place that had been locked away since the funeral, and before he fully understood what he was doing, Marcus stood up and said yes. He said yes, of course, please sit down, please join me. Then he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He called Betty over and asked her to bring mince for everyone, the full Thanksgiving dinner for each person, whatever they wanted, and when David started to protest, saying they couldn't possibly accept such generosity, Marcus's voice broke slightly as he said, please, it would be an honor. It would mean more to him than they could possibly understand. The family sat down, the children wide-eyed and cautious, the parents still uncertain if this stranger's kindness was real or would somehow come with strings attached. Marcus watched them, these people who had every reason to be bitter and angry at the world, and saw how the parents still smiled at their children, how they made a game of choosing items from the menu, how the oldest boy made sure his little sister got the crayons to color on her placemat. This was love. This was what mattered. This was what he had sacrificed and lost and spent every day since missing with an H that never diminished. The food arrived, and at first everyone ate quietly. The children focused on their plates with the intensity of people who didn't know when their next meal might come. But gradually, slowly, conversation began. The youngest daughter asked Marcus if he was eating alone because he was sad, the kind of direct question only children can ask without cruelty. Marcus found himself answering honestly for the first time in years, telling her yes, he was sad he had lost people he loved very much, and holidays were hard for him now. The little girl nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense, and then she did something extraordinary. She offered Marcus her stuffed rabbit to hold, saying the rabbit always made her feel better when she was sad, and maybe it would help him too. Marcus took that worn, precious toy in his hands, that thing which was probably this child's only possession that brought her comfort, and he felt tears running down his face for the first time since the funeral. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't ashamed. He was just grateful, overwhelmingly grateful, that this family had walked through that door and given him something money had never been able to buy: connection, purpose, the feeling of being needed and of needing others. David and his wife Sarah told their story, how a series of small misfortunes had snowballed into catastrophe, how they had never imagined they would be homeless, how they were trying so hard to protect their children from the trauma of their situation while also being honest about their struggles. They talked about the guilt of not being able to provide, the constant anxiety of not knowing where they would sleep, the exhaustion of maintaining hope when everything kept falling apart. Marcus listened, and in their story, he heard echoes of his own. Different circumstances, different scale, but the same fundamental truth: life could take everything from you in an instant, and you could spend years trying to figure out how to build something meaningful from the wreckage. He found himself talking too, really talking. Not the polished speeches he gave at board meetings, but raw, honest words about grief and regret, and the peculiar loneliness of having everything except what you actually need. He told them about his daughter, Emma, who had loved art and music and had wanted to be a teacher. He told them about his wife, Catherine, who had seen through his workaholic tendencies and loved him anyway, who had begged him to come to that Thanksgiving dinner 11 years ago. He told them how he had built an empire but lost a family, and how no amount of success had ever filled that hole. The hours passed without anyone noticing. Betty kept their coffee cups full and discreetly told Marcus the diner was his for as long as he needed it. The children colored and played quiet games, occasionally coming to show Marcus their drawings, treating him like he was their grandfather. Sarah and David slowly relaxed, their shoulders dropping from their defensive hunch, allowing themselves to experience this moment of respite without constantly planning their next survival move. As midnight approached and the official holiday drew to a close, Marcus made a decision. He pulled out his phone and made several calls, using every bit of influence his name carried. By the time dawn broke on the day after Thanksgiving, David had 3 job interviews scheduled with companies that owed Marcus favors. Sarah had an appointment with a property manager who handled his real estate holdings, and the family had a fully furnished apartment waiting for them with 6 months of rent paid in advance. When David protested, overwhelmed and afraid to accept such extravagant help, Marcus looked him in the eye and said this wasn't charity. This was family helping family, because that's what they were now. The family had given him something infinitely more valuable than he was giving them. They had reminded him how to feel, how to connect, how to matter to someone again. But Marcus didn't stop there. In the weeks and months that followed, as David excelled at his new job and Sarah began working part-time while the children settled into school, Marcus found himself becoming part of their lives in ways that surprised everyone, especially himself. He attended the youngest daughter's school play. He taught the oldest boy to play chess. He shared Sunday dinners with them, not in expensive restaurants but in their small apartment where the food was simple and the laughter was real. He established a foundation, not the kind that wrote checks from a distance, but one that personally helped families like David's, that understood how quickly stability could disappear and how vital it was to offer not just financial assistance, but human connection and dignity. He named it the Emma Catherine Foundation, and for the first time since her death, thinking about his daughter didn't only bring pain. It brought purpose. On Thanksgiving the following year, Marcus didn't go to the diner. Instead, he sat at a crowded table in David and Sarah's apartment, surrounded by people who had become his family through choice rather than blood. The youngest daughter, who still carried that mended rabbit everywhere, sat next to him and held his hand during grace. David looked across the table at him with tears in his eyes and thanked him for saving them, but Marcus shook his head. He told them the truth: they had saved him. They had walked into that diner when he was at his lowest point, when he was going through the motions of living without actually being alive, and they had asked to share his table. In doing so, they had taught him that wealth meant nothing without connection, that success was meaningless without love, that the only way to honor the people we've lost is to cherish the people we still have. They had taught him that it's never too late for redemption, never too late to build a new family, never too late to let someone in. And as he looked around that table at the faces that had become so dear to him, Marcus Wellington realized something profound. He had spent billions trying to fill the emptiness in his life, but all it had taken was one homeless family brave enough to ask a lonely stranger if they could share his table, and kind enough to share their hearts when he said yes. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us about a time when kindness changed your life, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Together, we can spread more light in the world.